Hello and welcome to Cheeky Scientist News. I'm Isaiah, and today's top story is how to give employers certainty. There is a great article in the Harvard Business Review called How Certainty Transforms Persuasion. Now, you can get all of these articles that I show in our show notes. If you go to cheekyscientist.com/news, on our news page, you'll be able to go to each individual news show episode, including this one, and get all of our articles. We've had a lot of requests for this, so I wanted to mention it before we dive into today's top story. So let's get back to the top story. How to give employers certainty. What do you have to give them certainty over first and foremost? Two things. Why you? Why us? Why can you be the best fit for the job, or why are you the best fit for the job? You can think about it either way. And compared to who? Other candidates. The second one is why us? A lot of people forget this. Why do you want to work at our company over any other company? Why do you want this job, not just any job? So how do you give them certainty? I like this way of thinking about it, especially if you have an advanced degree. It's not so much being confident or faking it before you make it. There's a scientific process to infusing the other person with certainty, but it starts with you. If you don't believe you can add value to the company, you're never going to convince them that you can add value to the company. So how do you do this? The article starts by saying, look, this is what certainty is. It's a belief system, and it's very subjective. There's some objective things you can do. There's some things it talks about scientifically to give other people and yourself certainty, but you have to understand it's subjective, and that's okay. You're influencing somebody's point of view. You're directing their viewpoint, their focus, right? We're taught to do the opposite coming out of higher education, to be objective, right? Persuasion's bad, but that's the social norm for academia, or social norm even for your work in your current corporate job, if you have a job already. But in job searching, you're persuading, you're selling yourself. If you don't like the idea of selling yourself, I have an article on that I'll discuss later too. So what are the four levers of certainty? The four levers of certainty. The first is consensus. Social, it's a nice way of saying social proof, right? So to give answers when interviewing that talk about other people being in alignment with your decisions or the direction that you went. It does say you can enhance certainty by discussing pros and cons. This is best done when you're giving an answer using the STAR technique, or there's other techniques called, it's a different acronym, CARL, I'll talk about here in a minute with another article. But by going through the STAR technique or similar, you talk about problems you had and how you overcame them, right? How you found solutions. So it's the con and the pro. The problem is the con. The pro is that you solved it. So by doing this, you give the employer certainty. But when you're giving the pro, you're talking about solutions. Talk about how other people were aligned with those solutions, or how there was consensus around those solutions, how people told you that it was a great solution afterwards. You have to find ways to embed this. We worked cross-functionally together, came up with this solution. I led early morning teams to hit this deadline. Afterwards, I received a lot of praise from the leadership team in this specific area. And we'll see that specifics are important coming up too. Number two, repetition. Just saying things repeatedly. Now, you want to temper that. You don't want to say the same thing over and over again, but it does work. I would rather you hedge on the side of repeating things too much than not repeating them at all, right? So you got to come back to the fact that you're a great project manager over and over and over again. If it feels like too much for you to say it, you're doing it right, because you're going to be very cognizant of the fact that you're saying it repeatedly. They're not. Repetition matters, right? You see politicians doing this all the time. You may not like it, but it works. Say the same thing over and over, the benefits you're going to add over and over again to the employer as you're interviewing. Another thing that it talks about is making sure that you are ready to defend yourself against attacks. We think that we're not supposed to be defensive. Not defensive, but you want to defend yourself. They're going to attack you. Think about it that way. They're going to be skeptical. They're going to challenge you. Well, why do you think you can do this role if you've never done it before? Well, you're leaving academia. This is your first job. You're too fresh. You've been to the top of the pyramid in academia, or in this other sector of industry, or this other field. Why would you want to come down to this sector? They're going to challenge you. Defend yourself vigorously, but professionally, right? Don't get all spazzed out, hot and bothered, right? Angry, but make sure that you're saying, completely appreciate how you feel. This is why it won't be a problem. Defend yourself. We'll give them. They want to see you defend yourself. A lot of people are confused by that. They have somebody skeptical that they can do the job, and they think, oh my gosh, interview's over. No, they want to see you defend yourself. And then finally, ease. I saved this one for the end because many of us think, okay, I'm just going to blur my background on this video interview. Or, my audio through the computer is good enough. Or I don't really need to have a better camera, an external camera. You do. The ease that they can see you, the ease that they can hear you really matters. The more ease, the less complexity. right? The more you talk about things in a universal language, especially if you're talking to somebody with a lower education level, the more likely they are to listen to your argument and feel certainty that you can do the job. This is why a lot of people who have higher education degrees, right, or any degree at all, they're talking too educated, too much jargon. They don't understand it. They can't understand it easily, so they don't hire you. So avoid that. Another good article in the Harvard Business Review, How to Evaluate a Job Candidate's Critical Thinking Skills in an Interview. I love articles that are for employers, and I love reading them from a job seeker's point of view. You can get inside the head of a hiring manager and really get ahead by doing that. So critical thinking is fundamentally a process of questioning. It talks about the best way to show that you're a critical thinker is to ask critically minded questions, not be critical, but to ask questions that show that you have a deeper understanding of the company, which requires research. It talks about the flip interview and how hiring managers are taught to do the flip interview, as in they're taught to turn the tables and turn you into the interviewer. So if you show up to the interview, like it's a test, okay, ask me questions, I'm prepared, you're doing it wrong. They want to see you command the interview at some point. So be receptive to that. One of the most common prompts for that is, do you have any questions for me? They want to see you take control and ask these critically minded questions. There's several different types of questions they talk about here, and they give them in order of which questions are more intelligent, more critically minded. The least critically minded question is just a factual question, right? Questions that have a straightforward answer and are based on simple facts. Who will I be reporting to? Okay, that's not showing that you really care about the job or you're critically minded. Go a little bit lower to convergent questions, right? These are closed-ended questions with a finite answer. They only have one correct answer, in other words. Now, if you go a bit deeper than that, you get to divergent questions, which are open-ended, right? Can you tell me about somebody who got hired here and they did a really good job of fitting into the company culture? What did they do? Question like that. Then even deeper, evaluative questions that require deeper levels of thinking. They're open or closed, but they elicit analysis at multiple levels, right? So going back to the same question, and can you tell me a little bit about what you thought they did well versus what the person I'll be directly reporting to thought they did well, right? Multiple layers. So again, that's called evaluative questions. It talks about framing, okay? You gotta make sure you're framing your answers, you're providing the context. This is where the STAR technique, situation, task, action, result comes in. So if you're giving an answer to something, say, 2 years ago I was in this situation, we were working on this project. Frame your answer so they can follow them. That shows critical thinking skills. Make sure that you're linking things together. Give them a problem and then bridge it to a solution. That's the task and action in STAR. The interpretation, what's the result? How do you interpret the result? And where do you go from there? What did you learn from the result? What are you going to bring to the company? So it talks about, after interpretation, it talks about proceeding. Great article there. The new rules of executive presence. So when you show up to an interview, you want to have executive presence. Now, this comes through in body language, of course, even the way that you dress, and there's some studies in this article that discuss this. What I like about this article is it compares, what is executive presence now versus 10 years ago. And so if you want to get the article, it'll be in the show notes again. It has these figures. And some of the things that it talks about is in terms of gravitas traits, right? Those versus communication traits, those versus appearance traits. So in 2012 and 2022, confidence was at the top of the list for again, gravitas. So was decisiveness, but then integrity actually went down over 10 years, just a touch, from 63 to 60, and inclusiveness went up. Wasn't even on the chart in 2012. Now it is at 68, as in 68% of respondents said that's important. In terms of communication traits, no huge changes, but superior speaking skills are even more important now than they were. The ability to read an audience is much more important now than they were. The ability to learn and listen is much more important now. In fact, it was 48% was forcefulness in 2012, and now it's the ability to learn and to understand different communication styles. I found that very interesting. Appearance, the polished look, number one under this segment still. 2012, it was 36% said this was the most important, and in 2022, 37%. Fitness and vigor. Fitness and vigor is now highly important. It's like number 3 on the list now with 28%. Last time it was, last time being 2012, it was physical attractiveness, but now it's fitness and vigor. Some of that might just be semantics. So what does executive presence mean? It means your ability to show up in a room, give a great first impression. It wasn't just appearance, it's how you're communicating. right? It's how you're holding yourself. It's the certainty you're giving them. You can use all different kinds of words to describe this, but it really comes down to certainty, whether that certainty is through looks, through communication, right? Or just in terms of your persona, how you're expressing yourself non-verbally. Another great article, Navigating the Complexities of the Interview Process and Interview Strategies. This is one of my favorite articles. It's in PR Daily. I love looking at different types of news sites, et cetera, that aren't just Forbes or HBR or these different publications that are for getting hired, but are in these niche fields. Why do I like this? Because it's PR, they're very direct. It says, number one, control your message. If you have two messages, you have no message. What is the message that you have when you show up to an interview, that you're the best person for this job? That means don't get distracted when they bring up other opportunities. They might show up because they just got out of a meeting saying, what, we might have these jobs opening up. We're really excited about it. They're all hopped up on coffee, who knows? And you're excited. You're like, oh, I love that job. It's way better. And you think that they're going to put you in that position, but that's a bird in the bush. Bird in the hand, right, is more valuable. Focus on the job at hand. Make sure you have a clear message. I'm the best person for this role. I could see myself doing this for the long term. Preparing to answer the question you hope you're never asked. I love this. If you feel a sense of dread over a question, you can't ignore it. The most common question that people dread when getting hired from our polls is a question about a skill they don't have, right? People are afraid to even apply for a job because of this. They're like, what if they ask me about these skills I don't have? Why'd you apply to this job? You don't have these skills. It doesn't work like that. You have to sell them on relevant skills that you have to compensate for your lack of a skill. You don't just say, no, I don't have a skill. So how do you handle that? You got to prepare on paper. It's like taking a test. If you have a test coming up, you haven't prepared, written your notes down, gone through any problems, studied it all, you're going to be nervous. Once you sit down for a few hours, you study, you get things down, you write it out, right? You solve some practice problems, whatever it is, you're going to feel a lot better about that test. So assume you're going to be asked your worst case scenario questions and then write out answers to those questions. That's what it says. And then finally, long silences can be weaponized. Get comfortable with them. If you're uncomfortable in long silences, hiring managers are going to do that all the time. They're just going to let you ramble, see what you say. Be prepared for that. Tired of having to sell yourself. So I wanted to put this into today's interview insights. This article, tired of having to sell yourself to land a job, try this instead. Great article. It says, first and foremost, get clear on the company's challenges. So this is for those of you that really hate the idea of selling yourself. You don't want to be your own advocate, toot your own horn, whatever the metaphor, the way of saying it is, right? We don't want to persuade people, convince people, but you're going to have to do that to get hired. There's a different way to think about it. If you don't like the idea of selling, of pitching yourself, make a list. It says here, identify your track record of solutions. If you think about it just in terms of you adding value to a company, it's no longer selling yourself, it's adding value, it's helping, right? It's solving their problem, right? Helping them. So think about it that way. So get really clear on what the company needs, and then write down all of the solutions you have achieved, and then try to connect them to the best of your ability. They're never going to be exact, but they can be relevant. Okay, the company has these 10 problems. Here are 10 solutions that I have that are as relevant as possible to these problems. Let me connect them. Let me bring these with me because interviews are open book. And now you can use that to convince them to hire you based on the value you're going to add, okay? Help them make an informed decision. I love that. That's how you want to think about it. Not as selling yourself, but helping them make an informed decision on the best person to hire, which is you, because you really care about the company. And of course, you have to care authentically. Last thing, this is an article that I liked. It's an ADD attitude. Again, I like going for these niche news sites. Nail your job interview, 3 strategies for neurodivergent applicants. And this is where that CARL acronym I mentioned earlier comes into play. So instead of the STAR technique, situation, task, action, report, it says some people might perform better with CARL, context, action, result, learning. Very similar. Context is the same as situation, right? You got to give them the frame. We talked about that in the other articles. Action, what did you do? What actions did you take? And what result did you have? But this goes a little bit more specifically into the learning part, right? So here's the result that I got. Here's what I learned from it and what I'll bring to your company. So whether it's the STAR technique or CARL, those acronyms will help you get hired. Just remember, you got to give employers certainty over 2 things: why you, why us, and you got to show them that you are indeed a critical thinker, and you absolutely are because you're here watching this. This takes us to the end of today's news show. If you want to watch our other shows or have them delivered directly to your inbox, just go to cheekyscientist.com/news, and you can go to any individual news episode. You'll see the show notes there. You can also go to Spotify and listen to our news shows. Right now, they are on our Cheeky Scientist Transition Report on Demand podcast. You'll see those news shows come out weekly if you want to listen to the audio there. Again, the show notes are at cheekyscientist.com/news. As always, stay current and keep advancing in your career.